Coming up on today's show, I'm very excited to have a conversation with Justin Riney, the Sustainability Commercial Manager at INEOS Styrolution America, LLC. And we're going to talk about the Polystyrene Recycling Alliance. You don't want to miss this. Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Kurt Stahle, that plastics guy, and thanks for listening today. If you're new here, this is where I share my almost 4 decades of plastics industry experience with you. I'll educate, interview, share case studies, showcase innovative products, and always discuss the topics and trends that affect our industry. Today's podcast is sponsored by Poly 10, compounders of colorant, additives, and functional master batches that are sold across Canada by my company, Simcoe Plastics, where we truly have a passion for polymers. You can visit us at simcoeplastics.com or contact us at info@simcoeplastics.com. So shortly after my interview with Dr. Christy Arment, author of The Plastics Paradox, was published, and I think that was either the end of November or beginning of December in 2024, it seems like a whole year ago, Justin reached out to me and asked if I'd be interested in collaborating. Naturally, I said yes, as I'm quite eager to put plastics into the most positive light that they really should be in, while dispelling the myths that are out there on social media, and also talking about what our industry is doing to act as a custodian of this valuable resource that we create and benefit from. So Justin is here to discuss his role at INEOS, and specifically the Polystyrene Recycling Alliance. Justin, thanks so much for reaching out, and I'm so grateful to have you on the show.
Well, yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm huge on supporting the industry, and specifically anybody that's out there talking about the facts and supporting the industry as a whole. So I'm very happy to be here today.
Well, that's great. And I think as an industry, we have to get the correct response out there and just simply discuss the fact that plastics are these wonderful family of tailor-made materials that are incredibly efficient. And we do have to actually step up and look after things and be a custodian of this resource. And we as an industry are going to work closer with governments and private industry, other private industry, to make these things happen. So we're going to use this as a platform to talk about what you're doing. So in the industry, most of us know the name INEOS. For those who are unfamiliar with the company or the brand, can you tell us about the company, a bit about its history, its products? I assume it has a global reach, but why don't you fill us in on that?
Definitely a global reach. The company's been around for a while now, but it's still a relatively new company in the grand scheme of the petrochemical industry. It's put together by Sir Jim Radcliffe. He is in England, and sure, you've seen INEOS. If you're a soccer fan, you've seen it on Manchester United. You've seen it on a Formula One team. Mm-hmm. There's also a French football team that's escaping me at the moment, but the name's everywhere. One of the largest chemicals companies in the world now. Got a very wide footprint of businesses. I specifically work for the INEOS Styrolution piece of the business, which is all of the styrenics. Mm-hmm. So think polystyrene, ABS, SAN, and then other products made out of styrene monomer. So that's our primary focus. It's global footprint for our business and for the INEOS group as a whole. And we're doing some really interesting things in styrenics, and we're very focused on the expansion of post-consumer recycled content, as well as bio-based or biocircular content materials to replace traditional virgin. And that's my role in a nutshell, is to increase the sale of those two things.
Wow, that's really fascinating. Now, can you tell us a little bit about those two groupings of product and what you're doing to actually pull together enough feedstocks to make a commercially viable product? I'm certainly interested because I'm a distributor and I know I have audience members out there, many who are in the molding community. Please feel free to expand on those products.
Yeah, so polystyrene would be your high-impact polystyrenes, your general purpose polystyrene, think crystal. Some people call it that.
Mm-hmm.
You've got high heat crystal. You've got a lot of different things that polystyrene does. It can either be foamed or rigid. And a lot of people, when they hear styrene or polystyrene, they think the trade name styrofoam. And we're talking about a product that does a heck of a lot more than just EPS. We love EPS and we want to support the EPS industry, but we also do liners in refrigerators. Our products go into cars. It goes into a lot of different things that not everybody is aware of. ABS, think children's toys. It's a high impact product. It's durable. It's easy to process, so it goes into a lot of high volume toys, and also can go into automotive. SAN is also going to go into the automotive industry. So we do a lot of different things. We're definitely more than just focused on packaging and packaging converters. We love our packaging and packaging converter customers, but we do a heck of a lot more than that.
Yeah, and I've been in the auto industry, supplying to the auto industry for quite some time. And yet, once you get past, the basic polyolefins, the styrenic family, I would argue that's the next most popular family of resins to go into a car. And it just, they offer such a unique blend of physical property characteristics, and of course, cost. Everyone is thinking about that, but they are a very, very unique family of products and highly versatile.
Yeah.
Very cool. So tell me about INEOS and their involvement with the Polystyrene Recycling Alliance. Was there one specific thing that sort of got people's attention focused on this, or was it a gradual aligning of corporate values looking for an initiative? How did that all play out?
It's kind of it's a complicated question of how we actually got here. But I think the easiest way to describe it is polystyrene's been under fire, we think wrongly, by different groups within the U.S. We'll call them non-governmental organizations, NGOs,
yes,
legislators, and others that falsely believe that polystyrene is not recyclable. And I see a lot of conflating of EPS or styrofoam with polystyrene as a whole. And what's interesting is EPS, transport packaging, is actually one of the highest recycled products in all of the U.S. And not a lot of people know about that. So that's really the genesis of this, is not a lot of people understand what we're doing as an industry already for polystyrene recycling. So that's one big piece of this. And the other big piece of it is we want to expand polystyrene recycling access and rates in the Americas, so Canada, U.S., and Mexico. And so a lot of people believe polystyrene is not recyclable, like I said, but we ran a study with RRS, which is Resource Recycling Systems. It's a third-party group. It's not us. We didn't just come up with our own data. We paid somebody else to do that. That way we knew that the answer we got was realistic. We really didn't know what recycling access for polystyrene was in the Americas, but we started at the U.S., and the study showed that 105 million Americans, or over 30%, nearly one-third of Americans have access to recycle at least one polystyrene item, which is way more than, candidly, we thought it was going to be.
Okay.
And a lot higher than most people thought. So we came together with America Styrenics, so AmSty, which is a competitor.
Mm-hmm.
But we joined forces with our competitor to start a trade organization specifically focused on expanding polystyrene, because we think it's a great product and it's a great industry and it should be used in packaging and we should not be banned. And that's really the kind of the genesis of this whole thing, is to protect the future viability of polystyrene in all of its forms in packaging going forward.
Well, I'm glad you're doing that. And, I think my comment initially would be we've heard the other side of the argument for what seems like decades now. And I think there's a lot of well-intentioned efforts about keeping things out of landfill. Great, keep it out of landfill, but recycle it. Like it's, that's really where the drive has to be. And, as Dr. DeArmond said, plastics represent about 1% of all the goods that we consume on an annual basis to produce the various things that we need to just carry on living globally. 1%. So plastics gets a lot of attention, but holy smokes, there's 99% of other things out there that we need to focus on. So if we can be good environmental stewards, maybe that'll rub off on other sectors too. And I'm sure, I'm sure other sectors aren't, just sitting idly by and hoping no one notices them. But I think it's incumbent upon us as an industry to put our best foot forward, get the right message out there. Now, I do have a question for you about the expandable polystyrene. Certainly in our jurisdiction, and for those of you listening, I'm about 60 miles north of Toronto in Ontario, Canada, and I can't recall any jurisdiction, and I've lived in a few areas in Ontario, that actually recycle expandable polystyrene, EPS, the packaging foam. Can you talk about how that's recycled? Is it densification, or is there another process?
Pretty much every expandable polystyrene producer that's making transport packaging is taking that material back through a densification program at distribution centers, big box stores, and others. And they're bringing back all of that material. And the EPSIA, which is the trade organization for expandable polystyrene, said that 31% of all EPS transport packaging in the U.S. is recycled annually. And it's all through those kind of systems where there's either a drop-off at the actual molder or the EPS resin producer. Mm-hmm. And that happens all over the place. As far as food service is concerned, there's a group called FPI, or Food Packaging Institute, that have an organization called the Foam Recycling Coalition. Okay. And they do grants with different communities. I live in Charlotte here in North Carolina, and Charlotte-Mecklenburg is one of the biggest success stories of that program, where consumers in Charlotte are able to bring all of their expanded or expandable polystyrene back to these dumpsters. Mm-hmm. Those are densified on site and then shipped out to different producers in the area. So it's a big system. It works incredibly well. It's very efficient. The biggest issue that's always been with EPS is the 98% error, right? It makes it difficult to transport.
Yes. Yep.
But when you can densify it and you can push out all the air, you can make full truckloads of those bricks and then ship those economically to local recyclers. And that's a huge success story for the industry. That doesn't get a lot of focus because it's not going through the curbside system. It's still post-consumer resin.
Yes.
It's still post-consumer recycled material. It's just not going through the traditional channels, so it's not picked up by your typical metrics for recycling. And that's something else that we have to do as a trade group with the Polystyrene Recycling Alliance, is shine a light on what's actually happening out there. And there's more to recycling than just what's happening at the curbside going to a MRF and that system.
So of the 31% that you mentioned, which is an impressive statistic, so most of that would be captured from a retail level going back to one of these drop sites? Okay. That's pretty
so
impressive.
just think of if you have an appliance, so a washing machine ships from, let's just say GE.
Yep.
It goes to a distribution center, and then it's delivered to a big box store.
Right.
That washing machine is shipped encased in EPS to protect it. And if they didn't use it, and they used a different material, you'd have a lot more breakage. And you want to talk about an ecological disaster.
Sure.
Breaking a washing machine in transit, that's a ton of carbon emissions to get it from point A to point B. And so EPS does a phenomenal job of protecting the material. And then when it's taken out of that material, it's collected at the stores or at the distribution center, densified on site, and then picked up and shipped with traditional trucks in the same way that most resin moves around the country today.
You know, you raise a really valid point, and it's something in different forms. The same point keeps coming back when you talk about it being, an ecological disaster if a major white good was damaged in transport. I think this is the point that a lot of very well-meaning, but maybe individuals who don't see the full picture of things don't take into account. And that is just simply once the resources are expended to make a product and it's shipped, sometimes taking a fraction of, well, it's $1 or something, a couple of dollars in packaging to protect it. That's the insurance you need to ensure the good is protected. And there's a cost to it. And if it's not done, and I've seen this many times in my career in manufacturing and all sorts of different aspects, if you do not package an item properly and it breaks, that's a tremendous waste. Maybe most consumers would be more sensitive to, say, food waste, because that's something that they can control and they see based on their own food budget. And I don't think anyone enjoys throwing out food. But the fact that we're using some packaging to protect a manufactured good so it gets to a consumer in one piece functional, I don't think we want to backtrack on the use of the right items to do that.
I could not agree more. I think I've always said, and I will continue to say, that I view sustainability holistically. We've got to look at not just the end of life. Some people will argue whether we should even use the phrase end of life, but I'm going to use it here because it's parlance at this point. But we need to look at the whole life cycle.
Yep.
And protecting a washing machine, as that breaks, you're not recycling that fully. And then you're going to have to remanufacture it. And there's a lot of different things that go into that. And that is a lot of carbon throughout the entire chain. That, to your point, like 2 pounds, 3 pounds of polystyrene protects that in a much better way than paper. I don't care how much weight of paper you put in there. It's not going to protect it.
Well, no, and the EPS, for consumers that might be listening to this, they may not be aware, but because the product is so full of air, there's a crush factor. I'm not sure what I can use as an analogy to this, but if you have goods that shift in packaging, the EPS will absorb the energy from a shift of that finished good within the packaging rather than transmit the full force of, like, vibrational force from a truck, or if there was a sudden load shift, something like packaging with cardboard, all of that force will be transferred into the finished good. There is no absorbing of energy. And that's what makes EPS such a unique material. Maybe again, just for folks listening, and I'm thinking more on the injection molding side of things, not so much on other processes, but with the densification process, can you just quickly walk us through what that looks like so we kind of understand how this stuff gets recycled?
Yeah, the machines are typically not a huge footprint. There are 2 different processes that you can use. Most prevalent would be a cold densification process where it's really just using pressure.
Okay.
So big hydraulic pressure to mash the material. Just think of a trash compactor.
Yep.
It's the easiest way to think of it.
Okay.
Or you could do a hot densification, and that's going to come out more like ingots. So it'll look more, I guess, ingot's probably the easiest way to describe it. But when you do the cold densification process, it's going to look like a brick.
Right.
It'll be probably 4 foot by 2 feet brick of densified material. And then those are stacked on pallets, and then you can get the full truckload on that. If you ship the material without densification, because it's so much air, you're not even going to get a quarter of a truckload in most cases.
Yeah, you can max it out in terms of volume, but not weight, so it's not efficient. Yeah. So from what you're describing, and I'm not an expert by any means on this type of capital equipment, but it sounds like these are pretty straightforward pieces of equipment and not super expensive to purchase or commission in a factory.
Yeah, I'm thinking, I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but I think it's $50,000 for a top of the line brand new one.
Wow, that's very reasonable.
Yeah, it's not a huge expense, and you pay that back pretty quickly when you sell. You can sell EPS densified bricks for, depending on the time of the year and markets, anywhere from mid 30s cents per pound to low 40s, and the quality of it. So it pays back pretty quickly.
That's very reasonable. Now, when the product is recycled, can it go back into any type of styrene, or does it have to stay, like, does it have to circle back into an EPS product?
It depends. So depends on the feed source. So if we're talking transport packaging, it's typically transport packaging to transport packaging, because there are flame retardants in there, so brominated materials at times.
Right.
For shipping products that do have some combustion factor. So that could not go back into food contact. But you can densify food material, food contact material, as long as it's source controlled and segregated, and you can take that back into food packaging. If you have the right cleaning process and the letter of non-objection from the FDA, you can take that back.
Right.
The real game changer is going to be advanced recycling. So advanced recycling, most of the producers in the U.S. that are out there that are looking to get into advanced recycling, or they have commissioned plants, are using polystyrene. They're using hydrocarbons. They're looking for polyethylene, polypropylene, and polystyrene. And so that's going to be a game changer for polystyrene recycling in the U.S., because we can ride along with the bigger players. The biggest issue with polystyrene recycling, candidly, in the U.S. is we're such a small part of the ecosystem. We're roughly 3% of packaging, while polyethylene and polypropylene, to a lesser extent, are the 800-pound gorillas.
Sure.
So we can ride along with them and get put into bales at a MRF. We'll call them a pyro pack. That would be specific for a pyrolysis plant in the area that will take a mixed waste bale of polyethylene, polypropylene, and polystyrene. So think all of your film waste that can't be traditionally mechanically recycled right now.
Right.
Or your small format polypropylene that falls out in a MRF. And then polystyrene. That could all be baled together and shipped to advanced recyclers in the area. And there's a value for that.
Absolutely. I think it makes a lot of sense, because we, as from the plastics processing community, no one wants to have an oops mixing incompatible materials, but it does happen every once in a while. And, it's quite upsetting, because we understand that this resource has value. We don't want to see it go to landfill. And if we have, an oops with a styrenic and an olefin, we now have a different way to safely recover it. There's going to be an economic loss writing down inventory by the processor, but at least that's material that does not have to go into a landfill. And I think that's a win, no matter how you look at it. And
definitely agree.
Yeah. The other thing that you just made me think of too, when you're talking about packaging, EPS for packaging versus a food contact, if you're looking at $50,000 for a machine to compact them, you can easily have two different input streams and manage them quite effectively. I'm actually very encouraged by hearing this because I really didn't understand the ins and outs, and I'm seeing this as being quite a viable thing. So I hope for everyone listening to this podcast, they're encouraged by the fact that we actually have something super viable, like happening right now. And I think that's, it puts me in a good mood at least.
Yeah, we are standing on the shoulders of those that came before us.
Yeah.
With the Polystyrene Recycling Alliance. I mentioned FPI and their Foam Recycling Coalition. They've been doing this for a long time, where they're putting grants together for municipalities or anybody else who wants a densifier, as long as they'll accept EPS food service or XPS materials, so extruded foam. So think cups or things like that.
Right.
As long as they accept that, then they will give out grants to do it. EPSIA, for a long time, their members have been recycling this and just not getting credit, and nobody knows about it.
Yep.
So we're trying to make some noise to give credit where it's due, because that industry has been sustainable long before it was cool. And so we're happy to come along after them. And now we're focused on the advocacy side with the Polystyrene Recycling Alliance and the work of getting municipalities to accept polystyrene in their curbside programs. And we've got a lot of work to do, candidly. And we're excited about the work. We've got 13 confirmed members at this point. They're founding members. Like I said, the two organizations that kicked this off are INEOS Styrolution and America Styrenics, but now we've got 11 other partners in the industry that want to help, and we've got a budget out there that we're going to invest to make this happen, and we're really excited about it.
I think it's fantastic, and you got me thinking about just another little tangent on this. There are so many companies out there with very intelligent, if it's a CEO or a president or somebody sort of in the skunk work side of things, developing all sorts of innovative processes and products. And when they do something, they sort of keep it to themselves. And I understand, like there's competitive reasons why, you want to keep your innovations private. But when it comes to something like this, I agree 100%. You need a bigger organization to do the publicity side of it, and at the same time you can respect the processes and all the little tricks and tips and tricks that an individual company has mastered to make the system work. But to have that collective voice is really what it's about. And you kind of answered my next question about what the Alliance actually aims to do and some of the mechanics of it. So I assume there's some government lobbying as well at higher levels, like federal, at like U.S. government levels.
Yeah, so we're going to be sitting within the Plastics Industry Association. Mm-hmm. So we are one of their self-funded groups, very similar to the Flexible Film Recycling Alliance or the Plastic Bag Recycling Alliance that already exist. So we will be under their legal organization as well. So there will be some opportunities to do some advocacy from that perspective, lobbying, if you will. Our organizations are already doing a lot of that. I spend a lot of time with legislators and NGOs working to change hearts and minds.
Right.
Because honestly, whenever you look at something like the Global Plastics Treaty, for example, the first resin that's ever listed on any ban list is polystyrene.
Right.
And it's frustrating for us. There's a UC Santa Barbara tool that's out there online where you can look at the different legislative, we'll call them levers, that you could pull to deal with mismanaged plastics and plastic waste in the environment or litter in the environment. And if you ban polystyrene on that, there's no impact. It's a minimal impact.
Right.
There's a lot of reasons for that. Polystyrene's lighter. If you ban foam, you're going to have to switch to something else, either a heavier foam with another polymer, or get rid of the foam altogether. And then you go from 98% air to 100% of something else, which is never a good thing, right? We're talking huge weight differentials. So you're not solving the problem. And really only 43% of Americans who have access to recycle, they have a curbside bin, actively recycle. And that's a TRP number, so the Recycling Partnership. So that's not my number. And that was also mirrored in, so I said that I'm in the Carolinas. North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality also showed that it was less than 45% of folks in North Carolina that have access to recycle actually recycle. So if we're not going to recycle, which I think we should, to be clear, I want more recycling. But if we're not going to, it does not make sense to go to paper, most definitely, because you're just increasing weight and you're increasing everything else. So this is as much a PR battle for plastics as it is anything else, because there are multiple studies out there, but when you look at what consumers think about paper and aluminum, the first thing they think of is sustainable. And when they talk about plastics, it's convenience. And that's a real shame. And from my perspective, it's because our industry does a really bad job expressing the benefits of our products, which is why I want to support this show, because you're doing that.
Yep.
And we need more of that. So I want to make sure that I'm supporting those people out there that are independent voices that are making a difference.
You know, I can understand with the metal to some degree, because most people would understand, something like the concept of an automotive wrecking yard. And we've probably seen, on TV footage, cars getting pressed or shredded, and, there's metal and we know we can smelt that down and reuse it. Well, that's all well and good, not to take anything away from that. That's a great established process. But, if you've ever been in a pulp and paper mill, that isn't exactly.
It's a gross process. I used to work for a paper company, or a couple paper companies.
Oh, you know.
It's not fun. It smells bad. If you go down into the basement, you got rodents. It's a bad situation. It's really gross. I don't like typically bashing other substrates, but they don't seem to have a problem bashing us. So I don't mind in this case.
Well, when it's at least, if it's bashing, but at least we're getting, the facts out there, so be it. But it's funny. An interesting fact is 6 to 8% of mixed paper is recycled in the U.S. Everybody thinks that paper is some panacea of recycling. Yes.
If it's not cardboard in the U.S., it's probably not recycled, just from a high level.
Wow.
And so there's a message issue that we have out there where everybody thinks paper, sustainable or recyclable. And it got so bad that there are actually plastic companies that when they make, we'll call them plastic microwave trays or things like that, they went in to add like a craft brown to the colorant of those to make it look like paper, because that's the idea, is it looks natural. And there's this chemophobia out there where people think that if it's a synthesized chemical, it's dangerous. And you already mentioned the nasty chemicals that go into paper, and not to mention all the PFAS that went into butcher paper and any kind of paper that needs grease protection.
Right.
But there's this understanding that brown equals sustainable because it looks natural. And it's interesting, too, that if you take a plastic bottle and you wrap it in paper, it's more likely to be sold because people think it's better for the environment. But really all you did was add a layer of paper to something that already existed.
Well, it's funny. This is to your comment about going to the hearts and minds, in this case, more the minds. And let's face it, the typical consumer doesn't have the bandwidth to comprehend the pros and cons of all these different material families. And like, I think most people typically really want to do the right thing. Some may need a little more prompting than others. That's all. And, that's what we're here for. We're here to educate. But you reminded me of something. I'm old enough to remember grocery stores switching away from paper bags to plastic because of threats of deforestation. Well, okay,
Exactly.
we can't have it both ways. And recycle or reusable bags, whatever they're made from, some cases cotton or whatever, or non-woven polypropylene. That's great, but let's get this thing dialed in properly. And paper is not the solution to everything, and we have to manage what we've got. Now, just as we're sort of getting to the end of our time together, can you tell me, like, on a personal level, what drew you to INEOS, and like on your career trajectory, what got you excited about doing what you're doing?
Well, I fell into the plastics industry is probably the easiest way to describe it. I worked for a couple packaging companies, which I already mentioned. And at those packaging companies, I actually was a customer of INEOS Styrolution. So it made it a lot easier because I was familiar with the company. I knew what they stood for. They had excellent products, and they had the best service in the industry from my perspective.
Okay.
So it made it a really easy sell for me to come over. And I've been now dealing with sustainable products and looking at the next generation of feedstocks for packaging for about the last 10 years.
Okay.
And so those two things came together in the role that I'm in now. So my current role is about 50% advocacy, 50% sales of our eco products.
Okay.
And those are the two things I love to do most, is advocate for plastics and increase the circularity of the plastics industry. And so it was not a hard decision to come work here, because great people, great organization, and a role that fit me like a glove.
Oh, that's fantastic. It's great when those things just sort of come together. If you've got to get up every day to do work, at least, do work that you're passionate about, you feel good about, it's the right thing. Like, can't get much better than that. So as we're just kind of wrapping up now, for sure, can you share maybe one or two accomplishments from the Polystyrene Recycling Alliance that, if I was doing an elevator pitch for polystyrene and talking about it, I could say, hey, these guys are doing X. What might be a couple of good things you could share?
It's a little tough to say because we haven't formally launched yet. So our launch date is, I think it's the 28th of January.
Okay.
So we are just coming together right now. The one thing I will say is, before, we had no clue what our access rate was for polystyrene in the multiple different packaging formats.
Right.
And we've gone through, we've invested our own funds, and we now know what the baseline is, which is that nearly 33%, 105 million Americans have access to recycle at least one polystyrene item.
Right.
Before we started this program, we would have had no clue what that number was. And so that's a big thing. We're already engaged with NGOs. So we have several of our members that are members of the U.S. Plastics Pact, or they call it activators, including INEOS Styrolution. And then we are meeting with How to Recycle and doing all the legwork to get this thing up and running, to make sure that when we make those investments and we get the change that we want, it's accepted by the NGOs that are really driving this conversation. So we're doing a lot of outreach right now. We've got, we're looking to spend about $3 million in infrastructure investments over the next 3 years. And so we've got a lot of room to grow as well. We would love to have anybody who's in the polystyrene industry or even adjacent to it that have any kind of exposure to packaging and want to protect polystyrene as a packaging material going forward, we'd love to have you. So please reach out to myself, or we have a website, psrecycling.org, that is live, but it is not being, we'll call it, stop being advertised yet because we're not fully up and running. But
right.
We didn't wait for the launch date. We started early.
Okay. Well, this is fantastic. And on that note, Justin, I just want to thank you again for taking the time out of your day to be on my show, to talk about INEOS, to talk about the Polystyrene Recycling Alliance. I love what you're doing. I certainly consider you now a friend of the show, and hopefully we can have you back on as this thing rolls out and you can tell us more and more about what's happening. And if we can be of assistance here in Canada to this project, I'm happy to work with you. I'm happy to get people pointed in your direction, whatever it takes.
Well, and I appreciate that. And you're also going to be on my show.
That's right.
So, we're helping each other. So I've got my own podcast, which is not affiliated in any way, shape, or form with my employer. I want to throw that out there first and foremost. It's just me doing it on my own. But it's Redefining Plastics, and you're going to be a guest on there, and I'm looking forward to that as well, because I truly believe we need to support each other, and we need to make sure that more people are talking about the benefits of our products, because if, as an industry, we're not going to do a good job of talking to consumers, we need folks like you and I to be that mouthpiece for the industry. So I am very happy to support. I'd be very happy to come back anytime.
Wonderful. That's great. And as much as I hate to end the conversation, that's it for this episode. So again, I'd like to thank Justin Riney of INEOS Styrolution America, LLC, for joining me today to talk about the Polystyrene Recycling Alliance. And I always enjoy speaking with a fellow industry professional. Please go and check out psrecycling.org to learn more about this initiative. And as always, if you have questions or comments about the show or a suggestion for an upcoming episode, please contact me through That Plastics Guy on LinkedIn. I'd also ask you to consider following Simcoe Plastics on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, and I'm definitely most active on YouTube, posting videos and podcasts, and subscribe to our newsletter through our website. And of course, I'm on LinkedIn personally, Kurt Stahle. Thanks again for listening. Take care, and bye for now.